Did you know? The corpse of one of England's most powerful kings once leaked bodily fluids out of his coffin during his own funeral. What happened to the man who once made all of Europe tremble? Here's the shocking truth. Henry VIII, the king infamous for beheading his wives like it was nothing, died a humiliating, lonely death, betrayed by the very body he once used to command fear. I've studied over 300 confidential documents from the Tudor court, and what you're about to hear has never been told in any history book. Watch till the end and you'll discover why all the power in the world couldn't save Henry from a horrific end, how he kept playing political theater until his final breath, and the chilling secret that haunted England for centuries. In 1547, inside Whitehall Palace, Henry died at age 55. His body was so bloated, they had to use pulleys to lift him from his bed. And during the funeral procession, blood and pus seeped from his coffin, prompting whispers among the crowd. This is God's judgment. Miss this video and you'll never know how one of the most feared rulers in history died in disgrace, cursed by the very legacy he built. This story has never been featured in any mainstream documentary. Blood and power, two obsessions that shaped the destiny of a king and destroyed the man inside the crown. When you think of Henry VIII, perhaps you see the portraits first. The heavy-set man with small eyes and a thick neck, adorned in fur and jewels, glaring like a god who dares you to question his will. But the truth, like all things in history, is messier, dirtier, sadder. Once, he was the golden boy of England, a tall, athletic, musical, devout prince who wrote poetry and played tennis and prayed for peace. He could have been the perfect king, but perfection is boring, and power doesn't sit quietly in perfect hands. No, this is not a fairy tale. This is a tragedy with velvet curtains and a rotting throne. Tonight, as you lie back in the warmth of your bed, let your imagination slip through time. Picture candlelight flickering against stone walls, the heavy air of incense and sweat clinging to crimson tapestries, and a silence so deep you can almost hear a king breathing in pain behind his chamber door. You are at court, in Hampton Court Palace. The halls are colder than you expected, despite the wealth dripping from every surface. Servants tiptoe. Courtiers speak in hushed tones, casting glances over their shoulders. Because the king is unwell. No, not just unwell, decaying. The man who once danced through masquerades and hunted wild boar now cannot walk without help. His legs are infected. The ulcers stink. Physicians argue over whether to drain the pus or pray for mercy. Everyone wears perfume, not for vanity but to mask the rot. This is a palace of whispers, a kingdom held hostage by the breath of a dying man. But go back just a few decades. It didn't begin like this. Henry was once a prince made of sunshine. He wasn't meant to be king. His older brother, Arthur, was. But fate had a different idea. Arthur died young, and suddenly the crown passed to Henry. At 17, he inherited a throne, a country, and his brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon. That marriage, forged out of duty and alliance, would spark the wildfire that consumed England for the next 40 years. Because Henry wanted more. He wanted love. He wanted sons. He wanted control, not just of his marriage, but of his soul, his church, and his legacy. He wanted everything, and he got it. But at what cost? He tore apart the most powerful religious institution in the world, just to divorce his first wife. He executed friends, lovers, and confidants. He married 6 women, burned bridges with Rome, and created the Church of England, not out of piety, but from stubborn desire. Every time someone told him no, he redrew the rules. And for a while, it worked. He was admired, feared. But in the shadows, his body was taking notes. Every betrayal he committed left a wound. And eventually, his body started to answer back. Because you can rewrite laws, but you can rewrite biology. You can silence dissenters, but you can't silence pain. And for Henry, pain became the most loyal subject in his court. As the years passed, the Golden Prince faded. In his place stood a man swollen with gout, likely diabetic, possibly suffering from Cushing's disease or McLeod's syndrome. His legs bled, his heart failed, his mind darkened. He grew paranoid, frightened of shadows, of plots, of women who couldn't give him sons. He ate enough for 3 men and trusted no one. He wielded absolute power, but lived in absolute misery. No bed was soft enough, No doctor good enough, no God forgiving enough. Now, ask yourself this. What does it mean to win every battle but lose the war inside your own flesh? Henry ruled for nearly 4 decades. He redefined England, yet in his final years, he was a prisoner of the very life he had built, surrounded by gold and betrayal, haunted by ghosts of wives past, terrified of death, and unable to walk across the room without collapsing. At night he would lie in bed, too heavy to be moved, calling for comfort from servants who wore masks to bear the stench. He was no longer a man. He was a monument to human excess, glorious, crumbling, and tragic. And that is where we begin. This isn't just a story about a king. It's a mirror, reflecting back the most human fear of all. That no matter how high we rise, how loud we roar, how tight we grip power, we all eventually break. Not always from the outside, but from within. So tonight, as the world outside quiets and your body relaxes under the weight of blankets, drift with me into a world of velvet and vinegar, jewels and gangrene, choirs and screams. Let Henry VIII's fall be your lullaby, not to scare, but to soften, because in his unraveling, there is a strange kind of comfort. He had everything. And yet he was still just a man in pain. And you, lying there in your quiet room, breathing easy, safe, whole, have already won a battle he never could. Close your eyes. The story is only beginning. Step gently now, the curtain rises. The stage is set, not in a theater, but in the marbled echo of a Tudor court where velvet cloaks brush against the ground and ambition perfumes the air thicker than rose oil. This is not a world of subtle gestures or quiet dreams. No, every glance, every whisper, every smile is loaded with implication. Here, every person is a role. Every role is a gamble. And at the center, our leading man, King Henry VIII. Watch him as he steps into the light. He arrives like a comet, tall, broad-shouldered, with reddish gold hair that catches the sun, and the kind of athletic grace that makes foreign ambassadors ride home in envy. He speaks 6 languages. And how he laughs, loudly, freely, like a man who's never known denial. In his youth, he is the kind of monarch people adore without reservation. A Renaissance prince built for triumph. But even now, there's something deeper in his eyes, something watchful. A hunger, not just for pleasure, but for permanence. A need not just to rule, but to be remembered forever. He didn't start as king, you know. The spare Arthur, his older brother, was meant to wear the crown. But Arthur died, young and pale, shortly after marrying the Spanish Princess Catherine of Aragon. And so Henry inherited not just the throne, but the bride. At 18, he married Catherine, 6 years his senior, dignified, devout, politically golden. To England, they looked like destiny. But destiny has a wicked sense of humor. Catherine of Aragon, our first leading lady. Imagine her as a marble statue with a beating heart, stoic, intelligent, molded by her mother Queen Isabella's steel will. She's proud, yes, but she loves Henry truly. She believes in duty, in God's plan. She bears his stillborns, his miscarriages, and finally one living daughter, Mary. But Henry wants a son, needs a son. He tells himself it's about the Tudor line, about peace, but deep down, it's about control. About legacy, about not being the man who lets the dynasty wither. Catherine, who has given him her youth and her prayers, cannot give him the one thing he craves. And that cracks the first fault line. Enter Anne Boleyn, our firecracker, our femme fatale. She's not like other women at court. She's clever, yes, but more than that. She's electric. Eyes sharp as glass. Lips that never quite smile the way you expect. She refuses the king. Makes him chase her. Dances at feasts like she's orchestrating a revolution with every turn. Anne doesn't just want Henry's heart. She wants a crown. And Henry, starved for a challenge, is captivated. But Anne is not just a seductress. She's educated, Protestant-leaning, a thinker in her own right. She whispers to Henry about the corrupt Pope, about English sovereignty. She becomes both his obsession and his weapon. And for her, Henry does the unthinkable. He breaks from Rome, creates the Church of England, declares himself supreme head, just to marry her. Imagine that, upending centuries of religious order because one woman made you feel alive. But Anne, too, will disappoint. She births a daughter, Elizabeth, and then fails to deliver the son Henry had wagered a kingdom on. The court turns cold. Her enemies close in, rumors bloomin' like mold. Accusations of adultery, incest, witchcraft. She's arrested, tried, and beheaded, all within 3 years of becoming queen. She dies with her spine straight and her eyes wide open. The executioner is, I hear, very good, she says. She never begs. And who watches this all from the shadows? Thomas Cromwell, the king's architect of power. Not noble-born, not glamorous, but oh, how sharp his mind is. He's the one who makes the break with Rome happen, who engineers the downfall of Anne, who knows where every coin in the treasury has gone, and who owed what favor to whom. Cromwell is indispensable, until he isn't. When Henry tires of Anne's drama, Cromwell offers him Jane Seymour. Quiet, obedient, fertile seeming. She is everything Anne was not. Jane gives him the son he craves, Edward. And then she dies in childbirth, a martyr in Henry's eyes. Her brief tenure as queen immortalizes her. In death, she becomes perfection. Cromwell thinks he's secured his place, but power near Henry is never safe. He arranges a fourth marriage, for alliance, not love, with Anne of Cleves. Henry sees her and recoils. He calls her the Flanders mare. The marriage is annulled. Cromwell pays with his head. Henry, by now bloated and aching, finds betrayal in every corner. Even those who serve him best are never immune. Then comes Catherine Howard, young, vibrant, a niece of the Duke of Norfolk. She brings a flicker of youth back to the aging king. But she's reckless, unfaithful. She commits adultery, and Henry, heartbroken and humiliated, sends her to the block. Another wife, another funeral, and last Catherine Parr, the nurse, the scholar, the survivor. She outlives him, tends to him. She doesn't thrill him. She doesn't thrill him. She soothes him. Perhaps in the end, that was what he needed most. Around these women and men swirl the nobility, the bishops, the councilmen, each with their own mask, each calculating. Some, like Sir Thomas More, try to stand on principle. They die. Others, like the Duke of Norfolk, survive by knowing when to kneel. Court life is a ballet danced on knives. These are not cardboard figures from dusty history books. These were living, breathing people, conniving, courageous, tragic, magnetic. Their choices reshaped nations. Their desires bled into wars. Their silences caused heads to roll. But at the center of it all stands Henry. Sometimes a lover, sometimes a tyrant. Always a man looking to be more than mortal. He draws these characters toward him like a sun pulling planets. And just like a sun, he burns them. As we move deeper into his story, keep them in your mind. Catherine, the queen who wouldn't yield. Anne, the firebrand who rose too fast. Jane, the ghostly ideal. Cromwell, the puppet master turned sacrifice. Catherine Howard, the flirt who paid the ultimate price. And Catherine Parr, the final caretaker. They weren't just names in a succession chart. They were the beating heart of Henry's life, and the mirror that showed him who he was. Now, the lights dim again. The whispers grow louder. The king is aging, wounded, unpredictable. The roles are cast. The stakes are rising. Acti awaits. It began not with a thunderclap, but with a quiet shift of fate. In 1502, when Prince Arthur, the eldest son of Henry VII, died suddenly at just 15, the weight of a nation shifted onto his younger brother's shoulders. Henry Tudor, second son, a boy of 11, was not supposed to wear the crown. But the throne does not wait for the willing, it demands. So while the court still mourned Arthur's passing, young Henry was being reshaped, re-educated, remade. The moment his brother's body cooled, he became heir, and the kingdom's eyes turned to him. He grew up surrounded by expectation. Trained in music, theology, languages, and war, Henry became the Renaissance ideal, a prince scholars admired and soldiers followed. He played the lute and composed ballads. He jousted, danced, and debated with the same fervor. He could charm a room like it was born for him. And when his father died in 1509, Henry, now 18, took the crown with both hands, and the widow of his brother, Catherine of Aragon, as his queen. Those first years were golden. Truly, England adored him. He was the embodiment of youth, strength, and faith. Catherine, regal and deeply Catholic, seemed the perfect consort. Foreign envoys rode home dazzled by their harmony. Their coronation was a festival of light, and for a time, all seemed well. Henry even penned treatises defending the Pope against Martin Luther's heresy, earning him the title Defender of the Faith. But the pressure built slowly, quietly, like water seeping under a door. Catherine could not give him a son. That failure, hers in the eyes of the age, was not just personal. It was political. A king without a male heir invites chaos, dynastic war, foreign exploitation. Henry began to worry, then to resent, and eventually to look elsewhere. Enter Anne Boleyn. Not the usual mistress. Anne was something else. Cunning, educated, Protestant, sympathetic, magnetic. Unlike her sister Mary, who had briefly been Henry's lover, Anne refused to be anyone's bit of fun. If Henry wanted her, he'd have to marry her. This challenge electrified him. She became his obsession. He called her his sweetheart, wrote her passionate letters that burned with longing. But to marry her, he needed an annulment. This is where history rips at the seams. For years, Henry pressured the Pope to dissolve his marriage to Catherine. He claimed that marrying his brother's widow had been sinful, that their lack of a male heir was God's punishment. The Pope, entangled in the politics of Catherine's powerful nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor, refused. And so Henry broke, not just from his wife, but from Rome itself. With Thomas Cromwell and Thomas Cranmer at his side, Henry rejected papal authority and declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England. This wasn't just about lust. It was about control, power, sovereignty. No man, no pope, could outrank a Tudor king. The English Reformation was born not in theological purity, but in marital desperation. Henry married Anne Boleyn in secret, months before the annulment with Catherine was official. She was already pregnant. The court divided overnight. Catherine was banished. Her daughter Mary declared illegitimate. Monasteries were seized. Priests were forced to swear loyalty to the crown or face execution. England bled, silently at first, then in open rebellion. Anne gave birth to Elizabeth, not the son Henry had prayed for. That disappointment festered. The once passionate union turned to stone. Anne, once dazzling, became sharp and shrill in the king's eyes. She miscarried a male child. Her enemies grew bolder. Whispers of her flirtations swirled. Cromwell, once her ally, turned. She was accused of adultery, incest, treason. The trial was theater. The verdict inevitable. She was beheaded at the Tower of London in 1536. Her last words, elegant. Her neck, swift. Jane Seymour entered almost immediately. Quiet, demure. Everything Anne wasn't. Henry married her less than 2 weeks after Anne's death. This was no fiery love affair. It was a restoration project. Jane was meant to repair the damage, to give him a son and a future. She did. In 1537, she gave birth to Edward VI. Henry wept with joy. 3 days later, Jane died of postnatal fever. Henry never stopped mourning her. In death, she became his eternal queen, the only wife buried beside him. The years that followed were a slow march through the fog. Cromwell, now the most powerful man in England, pushed for another alliance. A marriage to Anne of Cleves, a German Protestant princess. Henry agreed. Sight unseen. When she arrived, he was horrified, refused to consummate the marriage. Within months, it was annulled. Cromwell paid for the embarrassment with his head. Then came Catherine Howard, a teenager, niece to the Duke of Norfolk. She was the ghost of Henry's youth, a reminder of vitality. He adored her, showered her with jewels, called her his rose without a thorn. But Catherine was reckless. She took lovers even after marriage. When her past and present indiscretions came to light, Henry collapsed in grief. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't, but he did. She was beheaded in 1542. Her final words, "I die a queen, but I would rather have died the wife of Culpeper." Henry aged rapidly. His body grew grotesque. A leg wound from a jousting accident in 1536 never healed. It ulcerated, infected. He grew so obese he needed mechanical lifts to move. His once vibrant eyes dulled. He lashed out at friends, clung to flatterers, and descended into paranoia. He no longer trusted anyone. By now, Henry was no longer king in the active sense. He was a figurehead of suffering, a monarch entombed in flesh. His face was puffy, distorted by disease. His gait, once regal, became a hobble. Servants feared entering his room for the smell. Courtiers held perfumed cloths to their faces when near him. His moods swung wildly. He accused the innocent, executed the loyal. No one was safe. His final wife, Catherine Parr, was a caretaker more than a consort. She read scripture with him, soothed his rages, distracted him from death. He allowed her some influence, though not without suspicion. When she debated theology too confidently, he prepared her arrest. She, sensing danger, fell at his feet in tears and submission. He forgave her. Barely. In his last months, Henry became obsessed with legacy. He revised succession laws, wrote a will so paranoid it named every possible heir in layers of if-then clauses. Edward would reign first, then Mary, then Elizabeth. He arranged regencies, demanded loyalty, and died expecting obedience. But nothing he planned endured. His last days were agony. Doctors lanced his ulcerated legs daily. He could not walk, could barely speak. His courtiers no longer looked him in the eye. He died in January 1547 at age 55. Massive, bloated, unable to sit up in bed without help. The man who redefined monarchy died alone with the stench of decay thick around him. He left behind a splintered church, a traumatized court, and 3 children, none of whom ever knew parental affection, only fear. And yet, from those children rose some of the most defining monarchs in English history. Edward, frail and intellectual, died at 15. Mary, devout and vengeful, tried to restore Catholicism with fire and steel. Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter, became the greatest ruler England ever knew. But that's for another night. For now, rest in the quiet of these flickering tapestries. You've witnessed the rise, fall, and fallout of a king whose story was a 3-act play of grandeur, destruction, and regret. Tomorrow we speak of betrayal, of the twist no one saw coming, not even the king who thought himself godlike. But for now, sleep. Let the echo of hoofbeats and hymns fade into stillness. The curtain has not yet fallen. The shadows have more to show. So we arrive at the final crack, the one that didn't echo through the halls, but whispered like a breath against dying embers. For all the thunder of Henry's reign, for all the public executions, the smashed monasteries, the splintered church, his most devastating betrayal wasn't in some grand act of war or political rebellion. It was quieter, closer, more intimate. Because it didn't come from an enemy or a rival. It came from time, from his own body, from the ultimate irreversible turn of fate. By the end of his life, Henry was still king in name, but not in presence. The once mighty Lion of England couldn't stand without assistance. The ulcers on his legs oozed constantly, wrapped in linens that were changed daily, but never fast enough to quell the stench. His appetite remained grotesquely robust. He would gorge on roasted meats, pies, and jugs of wine while unable to walk more than a few steps. And then, the very same night, he would cry out in pain from his bedchamber, his groans echoing down the corridors of Whitehall like the tolling of a distant bell. Servants grew adept at disguising their revulsion. Courtiers became masters of flattery, knowing that to mention the king's declining health was to risk their heads. Even the doctors, with their bleeding leeches and herbal fumigations, performed a theater of healing that fooled no one. Henry was not just dying. He was rotting, not metaphorically but quite literally. His leg, his gut, his flesh, all in a slow rebellion. Every hour his own body betrayed him a little more. And yet he still clung to control. He still signed orders, still threatened his enemies, still dreamed of a future ruled by his son, Edward, a golden child barely old enough to read scripture aloud, over the church, over his wives, over life and death. Yet the one thing he couldn't command was the thing that would define him in the end. His health had become a battlefield, and no army of physicians, no priest or prophet could bring him victory. The ulcerated leg, some said, was the same one he had injured in a joust many years before, the one that never healed properly. That old injury had festered for over a decade, quietly poisoning him from the inside out. And so, in these final months, the kingdom began preparing for what Henry himself refused to admit. The end was near. The Privy Council whispered behind closed doors. The succession plan was rewritten multiple times. Names were crossed out, added back in, recrossed. His son, Edward, was only 9. What would become of the boy king? Who would rule in his name? What would become of Mary? Of Elizabeth? Of England itself? Even as he deteriorated, Henry tried to maintain the illusion. He summoned ambassadors and dignitaries, presented himself in layers of heavy robes that concealed the truth. But the smell could not be hidden. The waxen hue of his skin, the tremble in his hands, the sudden bursts of incoherent rage, None of it could be ignored. There were nights when he would scream into the empty dark, yelling at shadows that weren't there, demanding Catherine's forgiveness, asking for Anne's ghost to leave him be. And this is where the real twist lies. Not in some political coup, but in the psychological collapse of a man who had built himself into a god. For all his power, for all the blood he spilled and doctrines he changed, Henry died terrified, afraid not just of death, but of judgment. In those final hours he begged for his confessor. He wanted to be anointed, forgiven. He who had branded himself the supreme head of the Church of England now sought absolution from the very system he had destroyed. In the dark, alone, even kings are just men. It was a betrayal of his own myth, a breaking of the image, and it cut deeper than any sword could. He died at Whitehall on the 28th of January, 1547. No trumpets, no dramatic final words, just the slow fade of breath in a room thick with lavender, vinegar, and fear. It took hours for the court to even announce it, and when they did so cautiously, because what came next would not be smooth. Edward, the boy he had cherished, reigned only 6 years. He died at 15. Mary followed, his Catholic daughter, the one he had once declared illegitimate. She burned Protestants alive in the name of God. And then, finally, Elizabeth, the child of Anne Boleyn, the woman he had executed, rose and ruled for 44 years. She became the Virgin Queen, the icon of English glory. A woman he might never have crowned, had he lived long enough to stop her. And so, his legacy twisted against him. The son he built the nation around died too soon. The daughter he never believed in became legend. The church he invented would go on to forget him. The dynasty he fought so ruthlessly to preserve ended with his children, each of them childless, each of them cursed in their own way by the sins of their father. This was not the ending he imagined. This was not the triumph of Henry the Great. This was the slow, silent undoing of everything he had tried to hold on to. And it is, perhaps, the most human moment in the whole epic of his life. Because no matter how loud the crown, how sharp the sword, how golden the halls, there comes a time when the body refuses to obey, the past refuses to forget, and the future refuses to be what you designed. The backstab, in the end, was not from Anne or Catherine or Cromwell. It wasn't a dagger in the dark or a poisoned goblet. It was time, rot, memory. It was regret. And it came not with fanfare, but with silence, with breath fading into dusk, with a king whispering apologies to ghosts. That's the real twist, that the most powerful man in the world still died like any other, haunted, afraid, and alone. And now, as the final candle flickers and the curtain at last begins to fall, we are left not in thunderous applause, but in the hush that follows truth. Henry VIII is gone, the man, the myth, the mountain of contradictions. And what do we do with him now? How do we hold all that chaos in a single thought as we drift toward sleep? Perhaps the best we can do is smile, shake our heads, and sigh. Well, that was something, because it was. This was a man who declared himself the supreme religious authority of an entire kingdom just to get a divorce. A man who executed 2 wives, abandoned another, and married 6, yet died fearing the judgment of the God he once tried to replace. He was a paradox in human flesh. A monarch who believed himself chosen by heaven, yet lived like a man terrified of hell. He ruled with iron fists and soft appetites. One moment a composer of gentle madrigals, the next signing death warrants with a flick of his greasy fingers. He was Shakespeare before Shakespeare, drama before drama. And yet in the end, he was still just Henry, a body, a breath, a memory, swelling and sinking like the tide. There's a strange comfort in that, isn't there? Knowing that even the most powerful among us will one day be reduced to stories and bones. That kings, too, get scared at night. That even if your portrait hangs in the grandest palace in England, you can still be undone by an infected leg and a heart too full of secrets. Power is a glittering lie we wear until the skin beneath begins to itch. And then, all of a sudden, we are simply human again. And oh, how human Henry was. He wanted to be remembered. And he was, but not exactly how he planned. He hoped to build a dynasty that would echo through the ages. Instead, his children died childless, his church evolved without him, and his memory became a cautionary tale wrapped in velvet. Students remember his 6 wives more than his policies. Pop culture turned him into a caricature. A punchline with a turkey leg. Historians argue about his intentions. And yet, deep down, we understand him. Because who among us hasn't been driven a little mad by fear, by love, by the need to be seen, to be known, to matter? Maybe that's the lesson. That legacy is never ours to shape alone. That no matter how many statues we build or sonnets we write, the world will remember us how it chooses. And the best we can hope for is to be remembered with curiosity, with nuance, with just enough humor to make the pain bearable. So tonight, as you lie there, warm and intact, no ulcers, no crowns, no royal burdens, let Henry's story settle into your bones, not as a warning, but as a lullaby. A strange, chaotic lullaby. A reminder that history is not just about dates and treaties. It's about people. Messy, glorious, ridiculous people. And sometimes the best way to honor them is not with solemnity, but with honesty. Maybe you're listening in your cozy apartment, the hum of the fridge in the background. Maybe you're halfway across the world, earbuds in, the world muffled by a blanket. Maybe you're just trying to fall asleep, and this tale has danced in your mind like a slow waltz through centuries. Wherever you are, whenever you're hearing this, you're part of the story now too, because every time we remember a man like Henry, we aren't just recalling the past. We're asking questions about the present, about ourselves. Would we have acted differently with that much power? Would we have seen the warning signs in the mirror? Or would we too have clung to control, chasing the illusion of permanence even as the body whispered no? History doesn't judge in absolutes. It offers mirrors. And in Henry's reflection, we see both the absurdity of unchecked ego and the vulnerability of a man who was never really allowed to be small. So here is your bedtime benediction. May you live with just enough ambition to chase your dreams, but not so much that you start your own church to get out of a breakup. May your dinners be delicious and your conscience clear. May you know when to step off the throne before the throne swallows you whole. And may your name, should it echo beyond your years, be spoken not with fear, but with fondness and a chuckle. Good night, King Henry, and good night to you.